Divine, what are we going to be talking about today?
So we're going to be talking about data security on Kubernetes. So basically, right, kind of giving a background, right, to the perspective of our listeners. Nice introduction to data security on Kubernetes. So I don't know if I can share my screen.
Yes, you should be able to. The green button at the bottom, the arrow, you should be able to.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Folks, if you have questions, please feel free to get them in the chat, and we can always continue the conversation on Slack as well. Divine is an amazing person. I'm going to leave his Twitter so you can follow him as well in the chat while he's talking about data security on Kubernetes.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, so data security on Kubernetes. So how this talk will go, so it's kind of like a 4-slide talk, pretty short, but I hope gives us much information. So we're going to start with why the need for data security. The weird question, because everyone needs security, home security. Then first steps to securing data on Kubernetes, the data security checklist, Kubernetes data security checklist, beyond the checklist, and how the data on Kubernetes community is helping, right, ensure data security on Kubernetes. So to start, I went to the last slide. So to start, why the need for data security? Basically, right, data, your personal information, your email, your health information, those things are like peculiar to a user, right? So it shouldn't be right for anyone to have access to that. So I think that explains the need for data security. And when building applications, right, you try as much as possible to implement security, passwords, authentication, or logs in order to protect data. So basically, that's the need for data security. But in the Kubernetes context, right, securing data is kind of a bit complicated. But the first steps to securing data on Kubernetes is secrets. So there's this resource called secrets. So currently I'm reading from the documentation. So a secret resource is basically, right, any vital information. Okay, to give a background, when creating applications, you kind of like have a database. Most applications use a database. Kind of have like a database, and to connect your application to that database, it will be like a login details, password, or let's say you have some TLSL LS certificate for securing networks. So these data are kind of like sensitive data, right? Hence the creation of the resource secrets. Yeah, so with secrets, right, instead of like having to put this, so normally there have been like issues. I know I personally made the mistake myself when building an application. I see myself putting this sensitive database, login passwords, and some sensitive data in my application code, and pushing that to a Git repository, whether public or private. And doing that, right, that is a big, huge vulnerability, because once an attacker gets access to that repository, or the secret is leaked in some way, everyone has access to your data. So maybe your database in this context. So aside from secrets, right, secrets on its own by default, as you can read the caution on the Kubernetes documentation, secrets by default are stored unencrypted in etcd. That's the underlying data store for Kubernetes. So the Kubernetes creators have given us steps in order for us to take to kind of like make sure these are secret data, this information that leads to our database, information that leads to database in this context. So basically, the first step is enabling encryption at rest. So what encryption at rest means basically is the database which you store the data. Yeah, you're sending data over the internet, you're storing, there's a database password, but there should be some encryption mechanism. But for context of this particular talk, we will not need to go into that detail. So to move to the next part, the Kubernetes security checklist. So basically, there's kind of like a checklist while implementing according to these steps, right? While implementing security and storing data on Kubernetes. So if you also look at here, the next step after enabling encryption at rest, enable and configure role-based, RABAC means role-based access authentication. So basically, to set privilege access to certain secrets to users. So let's say I'm the cluster administrator and this other person is Bart is the developer. So I have some certain privilege to access some certain sensitive data. Bart doesn't. Bart has and I don't. So that's basically just what role-based authentication means. Then to go into the security checklist and go into the Kubernetes documentation, there's a lot of information here, like things to do to secure your application, that's your data. And but there's one more thing that the Kubernetes documentation highlights, right? Like it was highlighted on the secrets documentation, is that checklists are not sufficient for attaining a good security posture on their own. And this is because of the complexity of Kubernetes. So I don't know if you tried storing data on Kubernetes. I don't want to go into the details, but basically, basics would be you create a persistent volume, create a persistent volume claim. So like there's a lot of things moving, right? So that's where like kind of like using third-party tools come in, which was also highlighted in the Kubernetes documentation here, right? That consider using secret stock providers and other third-party tools to secure your secrets, your sensitive data. Then also in creating data on Kubernetes, right? In storing data on Kubernetes, there are some other tools, and to highlight one of them, data core. So management simplicity, right? Doesn't require the complex knowledge in order to store data on Kubernetes. So like using all these external tools can like kind of make things a little bit seamless. So if to give an overview, I'll say you first implement secrets, right? You first implement the secret object, right? Then next you make sure your data is stored correctly in a secured server. Then release privileges according to these steps, and also using other tools, right, in order to store your data efficiently and to reduce the complexity, right, with the checklist alongside, because as things are moving, right, things are shifting, pods are dying, pods are restarting, you're onboarding new people to your team, several things are moving around, right? So having all these, right, with the checklist, using other tools like I mentioned, just gives you that sense of security, right? That sense of security, and also make sure that your systems are properly secured. And there's also one thing I want to highlight, right? Beyond the checklist, beyond using an external tool or not, it's social engineering, right? So I don't know if you guys heard recently of, not recently, kind of like in 2020, of the attack on the social engineering attack on Twitter, right? So they got access to the Twitter internal systems through. So basically, social engineering means, right, kind of like an attacker coercing unknowingly, let's say, someone that has access to this sensitive data, someone that has access to these tools, right, the third-party tool, someone that configured this, that used the checklist to configure the entire Kubernetes security system. So exploiting them, right, exploiting their weaknesses in order to gain access to the internal systems. So Twitter had the issue in 2020, right? So, and they got access and lost some data. I don't know if you can remember the hacked accounts or the hacked account of several prominent people, even I think the former president of the United States, and which led to several frauds and all, right. Though Twitter was able to react imminently, they still suffer criticism, right? So beyond implementing Kubernetes secrets, beyond implementing the Kubernetes security checklist to secure your data, beyond using external tools like data core, also kind of like I don't know, I'll target the phrase human firewall, right? So educating your engineers, educating your team members, those that have those privileges, right, to data, those access, educating them on what's on social engineering, educating them on what these attackers do in order to be very secure. Then moving on to the next and final on my talk is how the data on Kubernetes community is helping. So yeah, today is the DOK Community Explorer Day. So basically, we're currently like creating challenges, right? Creating resources to help beginners, intermediates, and every other person understand how to implement some of these Kubernetes checklists, right? Not only implementing some of these Kubernetes security checklists, also to use these external tools and just creating several resources to know how to properly host data on, store data on Kubernetes, because as we know, Kubernetes by default is stateless, and data on Kubernetes, not new, but kind of like it's a bit complex. So yeah, that's how the data on Kubernetes community is helping. I hope this my talk, those shorts, was kind of like insightful and gave some like overview and kind of like intermediate knowledge on data and security on Kubernetes. Some of the links I used, I'll share this slide. You can access and read documentation on Kubernetes secrets. There's a lot of stuff there. I also wrote an article on Kubernetes secrets. That will be published in a few days. And yeah, check out the checklist, check out other tools, and get involved in the DOK Explorer challenges and learn more about data on Kubernetes and how to secure data on Kubernetes. And I guess you guys must have seen this, my last slide. So this is my mood right now. And thank you for listening to me. And yeah, I think that's the end of my talk.
Fine, that was fantastic. The end of this talk, certainly not the end of your career as a speaker. How many how many talks have you given, by the way?
I think this is my second. So I've given some in-person meetup talks. So my first, let's say, official talk was the Kubernetes Days of Africa, KCD Africa rather. So I think this is my second, and I think I have some lined up for the end of this year.
Excellent, good. And
so how did I do?
Yeah, and we'll be seeing you in Detroit very, very soon.
Sure.
I think we can all agree that you did a very nice job. It's a complex subject, but it's something that can't be underestimated. And
exactly.
I think that, I just tweeted this during your talk that most organizations would agree that, data is the most important asset that a company can have. Not the most, one of the most.
It's what runs everything.
And so, regarding its security in all shape, different forms, it's something that can't be underestimated. And it's an environment that can be relatively complex. And so really, really, really got to be careful with it, whether it's misconfigurations, whether it's not anticipating vulnerabilities, things of that nature. These are things that we're hearing about time and time again. So I thank you for sharing that information with us today. I already shared your Twitter in the chat so people can find you. And as you said, you are very active in our Explorers team. So folks want to interact, reach out, they can do so on Slack. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome.